Hey, how's it going? Today, I want to take you straight into the mind of one of the most feared predators to ever walk the earth. But this isn't just about the T-Rex. It's about those unfortunate enough to cross its path. Picture this. Dense forests, tropical storms, the ground shaking under the weight of colossal footsteps, and in the middle of it all, a monster weighing nearly 20,000 pounds, hunting like it was programmed to kill. But the real question is, what were its main prey? Were they all doomed from the first roar? Or did some actually manage to stand up to the king? Today, we're going back in time to relive 5 of the most brutal, controversial, and mysterious hunts of this iconic dinosaur. You're about to discover the top 5 prey most frequently targeted by the T-Rex, ranked from least likely to most common, with details that go far beyond what you see in the movies. Each one hides fossil clues, battle scars, and surprises that most people have never heard of. So stick with me until the end of this video, because maybe, just maybe, you'll realize the king of the dinosaurs didn't always walk away from the feast unscathed. Now think about this. Did the T-Rex really go after anything that moved? Did it charge into every fight like it was invincible? Because the truth is, not every hunt was easy. Some prey were so dangerous that even the king had to pick his battles wisely. And that's why our countdown begins with one of the most heavily armored creatures to ever exist. An animal that carried its own built-in shield and swung its tail like a wrecking ball. Let's kick off with number 5 on our list. Do you really think the T-Rex attacked anything that crossed its path? It might seem that way, but when the opponent is a dinosaur covered head to tail in bony armor and swinging a tail that works like a 2,000-pound baseball bat, things change. Ankylosaurus wasn't just any prey. It was a walking fortress, measuring over 26 feet long, weighing around 13,000 pounds of pure muscle and bone, and looking like something straight out of a medieval battlefield. Its back was lined with bony plates called osteoderms, and its tail ended in a massive club capable of delivering bone-crushing blows, even to the leg of a predator the size of a T-Rex. But did the T-Rex actually try to hunt this defensive juggernaut? The answer isn't so simple. Fossils of Ankylosaurus with T-Rex bite marks are extremely rare, and that alone says a lot. The lack of direct evidence suggests 2 things. Either these encounters were very uncommon, or they often went badly for the predator. A 2005 study examined several partial ankylosaurid skeletons from the Hell Creek Formation in what is now Montana, and found no clear signs of active predation by T-Rex. On the other hand, in 2014, a fossilized T-Rex leg was discovered with a crushed fracture. Some researchers interpreted it as a possible result of a tail strike from an ankylosaur. The idea is that the tyrant may have attacked and paid the price. Now think about it. Is it really worth the risk? Hunting an animal that well protected, capable of inflicting serious, even permanent injuries doesn't sound like the smartest move for an apex predator. And the T-Rex wasn't dumb. Studies suggest it had above-average intelligence for a theropod, with cognitive abilities that helped it assess threats. In other words, it knew when to strike and when to back off. But what about the juveniles? That's a different story. Young ankylosaurs didn't have fully developed armor, and those did end up on the menu. Some paleontologists even suggest that T-Rex may have trailed herds of herbivores like Ankylosaurus from a distance, waiting for a vulnerable individual to wander off. That's the same kind of strategy used by modern predators like hyenas or lions, who watch and take down the weakest link in the group. Strategy over brute force. And why don't we see this more often in movies? Simple. Ankylosaurs don't put on much of a visual show. They don't run. They don't roar. They don't leap. But they were one of the biggest problems any predator could face in real life. In the Jurassic World franchise, for example, the Ankylosaurus makes a brief appearance and even knocks down an Indominus Rex with a tail swing. Over the top? Maybe. But the core idea is legit. This dinosaur could stand its ground against anything when it had to. In short, Ankylosaurus makes it into our top 5 not because it was a common target, but because it represents a rare, high-risk confrontation that reveals a lot about T-Rex behavior. When these two clashed, it wasn't just another hunt. It was a showdown between giants where one wrong move could cost everything. And understanding these exceptions tells us something even more fascinating. Even the king of the dinosaurs had limits. In this case, it was resilience that ruled. Now think about this. If even a creature like Ankylosaurus made the T-Rex hesitate, were there other dinosaurs that relied so heavily on a single line of defense? They didn't even realize how exposed they really were. Because in the fourth spot on our list, the rules of survival take a sharp turn. The armored tank steps aside, and in comes the solo sprinter. We're talking about a creature with a head built like a helmet, but a body nearly defenseless. Number 4 on our list, Pachycephalosaurus. To many, it almost sounds like a joke. A dinosaur about 8 feet long with a light frame and skinny legs, but with a skull so thick it looked custom-built for headbutting anything in sight. And yes, that was Pachycephalosaurus's trademark. A small, agile herbivore with a reinforced dome on its head, up to 10 inches thick. But the truth is, beyond that head, it had practically no defense. It didn't live in large herds. It didn't have claws, no horns, and not nearly enough speed to outrun a predator like T-Rex for long. In other words, if it was caught off guard, it was an easy meal. And here's the central question. Did the T-Rex really hunt these smaller dinosaurs? There are no confirmed fossils of Pachycephalosaurus with T-Rex bite marks, but that's not surprising. Most of its bones were small and fragile, and many of the fossils we found are incomplete or poorly preserved. Still, the fact that they lived in the same regions, like the Hell Creek Formation where T-Rex ruled, is already a strong sign that these encounters weren't just possible. They were probably inevitable. And if the predator was hungry, with no bigger prey around, or just going for an opportunistic strike, Pachycephalosaurus could easily end up on the menu. Now, this dinosaur also comes with its share of curiosities. For decades, many scientists believed the dome on its head was used in violent head-to-head combat between males, much like modern-day rams. But more recent studies have cast doubt on that theory. Some analyses of microfractures in the skulls suggest that these impacts did happen, but they may have been more about defense or intimidation than full-on battles. So, what looked like a super weapon wasn't much of a guarantee when facing a real predator. Now imagine this. You're a small dinosaur with a rock-hard skull, walking through an open field. Suddenly, the forest trembles. A roar breaks the silence. The scent of a predator fills the air. You might try to run. Maybe you even turn to face it, head down, ready to strike. But against a 9-ton predator with teeth the size of bananas, let's be honest, that headbutt wasn't saving anyone. And that's why Pachycephalosaurus makes it into our top 5. It was accessible prey, living in the same ecosystem as T-Rex, with just enough defense to delay the inevitable, but not enough to stop it. It put all its trust in a single weapon, and, like many others in prehistory, learned the hard way that one weapon wasn't enough. By the way, if you're enjoying this journey through the dinosaur age, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more bizarre, deadly, and surprising prehistoric creatures still coming up on this list. So far, we've looked at prey that required caution. Some were risky, others only appeared in specific situations. But all of them reveal a lot about how the T-Rex behaved and how it chose when to attack, or when to back off. Now we're entering a different zone. From here on out, it's not just about opportunity, it's about frequency. These were prey that crossed paths with the king constantly, and often ended up in its stomach. Simple as that. And leading off this new phase in our countdown is an impressive dinosaur with a massive frill on its skull, but one that wasn't always able to defend itself from a deadly strike. Number 3 in our ranking, Torosaurus. At first glance, it could be intimidating. Torosaurus was a true colossus of the late Cretaceous. Stretching nearly 30 feet long and weighing over 9,000 pounds, it stood out mainly for one reason. Its skull, the largest ever recorded among dinosaurs. Just the frill alone measured over 8 feet wide, with 2 large circular openings called fenestrae, giving it a look that was both imposing and oddly hollow. But size wasn't everything, and despite appearances, this wasn't an invincible warrior. Torosaurus belonged to the same family as Triceratops, the ceratopsids, but with a more elongated frame and, according to some studies, a skull that may have been structurally weaker in certain areas. Unlike Triceratops, which had thicker, sturdier bone structure, Torosaurus likely used its massive frill more for display or temperature regulation than active defense. In other words, it was big but vulnerable, and that's exactly what put it on the T-Rex's radar. The two lived during the same period in the same regions, such as the Hell Creek Formation. And while there are still debates over whether Torosaurus and Triceratops were truly separate species, with some theories suggesting Torosaurus was just an older stage of Triceratops, most of the scientific community treats them as distinct genera. Fossil evidence showing bite marks consistent with large theropods has been found on skulls and bones of ceratopsids similar to Torosaurus, suggesting that these confrontations really did happen. Some of those marks include deep punctures in the frill and at the base of the neck, exactly the spots a predator like T-Rex would target without hesitation. Now picture the scene. A massive, heavy herbivore with a frill that looked more like a war banner than armor. But all it took was for it to be isolated, injured, or simply outnumbered, and the T-Rex would move in. Because despite its size, Torosaurus didn't have the same offensive tools as a Triceratops. It was less aggressive, less equipped for a fight, and more exposed to side attacks, where T-Rex excelled. In practice, what looked like a walking fortress became a buffet of exposed meat. And that's why it earns a spot in our top 5. Not because of how well armed it was, but because of how often it may have been taken down. Large? Absolutely, but too large to escape quickly, and carrying a shield that, in the end, wasn't built for war. Now, if Torosaurus already proved that not every bulky dinosaur was hard to take down, the next one makes that even clearer. Because we're about to talk about a dinosaur that offered almost no resistance at all. Big? Yes. But defenseless, predictable, and far too easy to catch. A full-course meal, literally. Let's move on to number 2 on our list, Edmontosaurus. Among all of T-Rex's prey, few were as common or as frequently targeted as Edmontosaurus. This was the kind of dinosaur that didn't need to be injured, isolated, or caught off guard to become a target. In fact, it was born at a disadvantage. Edmontosaurus was a hadrosaurid, in other words, a duck-billed dinosaur. Herbivorous, large, peaceful, and often found in open environments. Could grow over 40 feet long, weigh more than 9,000 pounds, and moved in large herds. But the problem was, despite its size, it had absolutely no natural defense. No claws, no horns, no armor. Its only real option was to run, and hope it wasn't the slowest in the group. The massive presence of Edmontosaurus in formations like Hell Creek and Lance, the same regions where T-Rex dominated, shows just how frequent these encounters were. And this time, science has solid proof. Multiple Edmontosaurus fossils have been found with bite marks that match the shape and spacing of T-Rex teeth, especially on the vertebrae, ribs, and even the tail. In some cases, these wounds had begun to heal, meaning the animal survived for a while after the attack. In other words, it wasn't just scavenging. T-Rex was actively hunting. Even partially digested Edmontosaurus remains have been found in fossilized stomach contents of theropods, further supporting this species as a regular item on the menu. Sure, the herd behavior helped, but it wasn't enough. If one member of the group was weak, old, or lagging behind, that was all it took for the T-Rex to strike. And because Edmontosaurus was one of the most numerous herbivores in the area, it became predictable, constant, and easy to track. It was basically the cattle of the Cretaceous, a ready-made meat package for anyone who knew how to hunt with precision. In fact, many paleontologists believe Edmontosaurus made up the majority of the adult T-Rex's diet, even more than ceratopsids or ankylosaurs. And it makes sense, abundant, large, and not much of a challenge. That's exactly why it lands at number 2 on our list. Not because it was dangerous, but because, for a predator like T-Rex, it was the surest meal. Easy to find and even easier to bring down. But what about when the hunt wasn't that easy? What about when the T-Rex had to risk everything to come out on top? Because sitting at the top of this list isn't just prey. It's an opponent. A dinosaur that didn't run, it fought back. And one that, more often than not, left the king injured. Or worse. The number 1 spot on our countdown marks the most legendary clash in prehistoric history. Two giants. One real battle, with scars left in the fossils, and in the bones of those who dared to face each other. Number 1 on our list, Triceratops. If there was one dinosaur that could go head-to-head with T-Rex, it was Triceratops. At nearly 30 feet long and weighing over 13,000 pounds, armed with 3 sharp horns and a massive bony frill shielding its neck, Triceratops wasn't just another herbivore. It was a walking tank with built-in weapons. And the fossils make that clear. Skulls of Triceratops have been found with deep puncture marks from T-Rex teeth, suggesting direct frontal attacks. In some cases, those wounds show signs of healing, meaning the animal survived at least one encounter. But the opposite has been found: 2 T-Rex bones with fractures consistent with a blow from Triceratops' horns. In other words, whenever these two clashed, someone walked away wounded. A 2012 study examined the frills of over 100 Triceratops specimens and found repeated patterns of punctures and damage, showing that these fights weren't rare. They were a regular part of life between predator and prey. But here's the question: why would T-Rex go after something so well-armed? Because even with all that gear, Triceratops was the biggest slab of meat available in the late Cretaceous. And for a predator weighing 9 tons, that kind of opportunity was just too good to pass up. Was it risky? Absolutely. But for T-Rex, it was worth the risk. That's why Triceratops claims the number 1 spot on our list. Not because it was easy prey, but because defeating it took everything T-Rex had. It was the only creature that could turn a simple hunt into all-out war. For millions of years, T-Rex ruled as the apex predator of North America. But even the king had to choose his battles wisely. From defenseless prey like Edmontosaurus to brutal rivals like Triceratops, every encounter told part of that story. A story etched not in words, but in scars, shattered bones, and fossils buried in time. And now, you've seen the 5 hunts that define the reign of the greatest carnivore of the dinosaur age. Our countdown ends here, but the world of T-Rex is far from over. So tell me in the comments, which of these hunts surprised you the most? Which prey do you think truly made the king tremble? And of course, if this journey through the Cretaceous kept you hooked, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because next time, we might dive even deeper, maybe into the T-Rex's greatest enemies, or the exact moment when it all came to an end. See you there.